Hey, just before we get started, we're recording this podcast episode on October 28th before the election. So I just wanted to timestamp it for everyone in case any information has changed when this airs.
You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande, and this is Let's Get Surety. Today we are excited to be talking about federal and state infrastructure. I know that's something that our membership wants to hear more about. To talk about that with us, I've got my co-host, Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP. Hey, Mark.
Wonderful to be here again, Kat.
It's always great having you as a co-host. We
Thanks.
also have with us as a guest, Larry LeClaire, Director of Government Relations at NASBP. Hey, Larry.
Hey, good morning, Kat. Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You're becoming a podcast regular, Larry.
I know. Geez, I'm going to go on the road, start signing autographs.
I think there's going to be a demand. We also have with us today Ed Mortimer. He's Vice President of Transportation and Infrastructure at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ed.
Kat, great to be with you all.
Can you, before we dive into the issue, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Ed, and about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce?
Sure. So I represent the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We're the largest trade group that represents the business community. So we represent companies, both large and small, as well as many state and local chambers. And so our job is to advocate on behalf of the business community for free enterprise. I have the pleasure of serving as our Vice President of Transportation Infrastructure. So all things transportation and infrastructure are in my purview. I also serve as an Executive Director of a coalition called Americans for Transportation Mobility, which is a business labor coalition that has been for the last 19 years advocating on behalf of the need to invest in our nation's infrastructure.
Well, I know the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been really active in advocating for transportation and infrastructure issues. I know we can look at it from both state or federal infrastructure funding issues. Why don't we go ahead and start with federal and just talk a little bit about the current state?
Sure, Kat. So, at the federal level, we recognize that infrastructure is a shared responsibility, federal, state, and local. But again, it's the federal vision, right? Dwight Eisenhower is the reason we have an interstate highway system. Teddy Roosevelt is the reason we have our inland waterways. And so over the last several years, it's been state and local governments have been doing their job in raising revenue for infrastructure. It's the federal government that hasn't been doing it. And we've, since 2015, have been calling on federal lawmakers to not just patchwork our systems that were built in the 50s and 60s, but actually modernize, bringing innovation and technology into a situation where the infrastructure we need for the 21st century, we're getting away from a brick and mortar economy. We're moving into e-commerce. We know that some of the climate issues that we had in the 50s are different today. And so we want to build infrastructure that's resilient. And so we've been working with federal lawmakers to make this vision a reality. We were hopeful to get it done over the last several years because we had both the president and Congress on a bipartisan basis saying they were going to do so. While we've made progress and continue to get record amounts of federal investment, we still don't have that vision. And so we're going to continue to work with your membership and many others in the business, organized labor, other stakeholder community to get that federal vision and action. And we feel very optimistic as we enter into this election cycle and past the election cycle that getting a federal infrastructure bill that can allow us to modernize our transportation networks is something that can be taken up early next year.
Ed, could you kind of, infrastructure, transportation, those are big words. Can you break them down a little bit? For example, drinking water, bridges, highways, rural broadband. Can you kind of go in a little bit more about as you see the vision or what it should be?
That's a great question because as this debate has continued, the word infrastructure can mean different things to different people. I'll speak to the business community, how we view infrastructure. Obviously, our transportation networks, as you mentioned, Obviously, backbone is our roads and bridges, but our airports, our waterways, are important. But also the water, the stormwater, wastewater, in the energy sector, pipelines, transmission grid, and then rural broadband, where there hasn't been a customer base to build out broadband. And obviously, going through the pandemic, we recognize that if you want to have a 21st century job, every American needs to have broadband access. So that is our vision. I will say others have included things like school construction, affordable housing. Again, those are important issues, but from our perspective at the Chamber, we really want to focus on core where the federal government could spend limited dollars that would have the most benefit, not just to businesses, but also to the quality of life of the American citizen.
Well, I know, to steal a line from a famous movie, where's the money? And that funding has always been at the heart of the travails in trying to get an infrastructure and transportation vision to the fore. Can you touch a little bit on funding, both as an issue and some of the potential solutions that could be available to a well-articulated vision?
Absolutely. And, funding is always an issue. But I think from our perspective, these are investments in assets that Americans benefit from 50 to 100 years. And so that's why we at the U.S. Chamber, we put out a 4-point plan for how to modernize America's infrastructure. And again, I'll go through the plan quickly. First part of our plan is for roads, bridges, and transit. The way we paid for those at the federal level since we started the Federal Aid Highway Program in 1956 is through a fuel tax. We haven't adjusted that fuel tax since 1993. In our view, it's past time to adjust it. And so our proposal calls for a 5-cent increase in the user fee for gasoline tax and also for diesel over a 5-year period. So you get 25 cents over 5 years. Our analysis shows that would generate $400 billion over a 10-year period. And then we know that down the road, we're probably going to be getting away as we bring on more electric and alternative fuel vehicles. The gasoline tax probably is not sustainable long term. And so we're very interested in following pilot programs looking at a vehicle mile traveled tax where it won't matter the energy source of the vehicle. You'll pay for how many miles that you travel. Again, that's about 10 years away. So the Chamber's view is let's adjust the fuel tax one more time and then transition in the next 10-year period to the VMT. Second is we need to encourage more private investment where it makes sense. Private investment doesn't supplement. It doesn't replace, it supplements federal investment. But again, if you look at a lot of other countries around the world, they have a lot more private investment in their infrastructure than we have here in the United States. And so finding ways to encourage it where it makes sense. Third is we need to utilize limited dollars more effectively. And that means we need to streamline the permitting process. It shouldn't take longer to get the permit than it does to actually finish a project. And so we've been very supportive of the Trump administration, put out an executive order 2 years for a timeline on federal projects. And again, this isn't changing environmental law. This isn't changing public input in these projects, but we need to get a yes or no answer in a prompt manner. And then if we have no answer, let's put limited dollars into projects that get us to yes. And so we think there's a toolkit of funding and financing solutions that project sponsors should have, and then they should pick the ones that make sense for those particular projects. But again, core is that we need to adjust that fuel tax one more time. As you can imagine, it's not the most popular in Washington. That being said, 39 states have done it over the last 4 years. And according to the American Road Transportation Builders, most members of state legislatures, I think it's over 95% win re-election who vote for it. And the folks that vote against raising revenue for transportation actually only get elected 90% of the time. So this misnomer that voting for more infrastructure is going to cost you your seat, it's wrong. The data doesn't back it up. And again, we at the U.S. Chamber normally don't support increasing federal taxes. But again, the Constitution calls for the federal role here in infrastructure investment. And so this is one that needs to be done. And we're going to continue to stand by Republicans and Democrats who are willing to take that plunge and to actually make the investments to have a sustainable funding source to build our 21st century infrastructure.
And that's an interesting point. You said 39 states have actually increased their own state fuel tax. So then you would think that the federal Congress would have more courage to undertake that action. What do you see as the hindrance there?
Well, I think some of the hindrance has to do with some of these members of Congress signed a pledge that says they'll never raise taxes. And to be honest with you, I don't think any elected official should sign a pledge on anything because we obviously have changing environments and changing times. Our view is that a user-based system makes sense. It's conservative principle. And so paying for something and having it go to a dedicated purpose that benefits all Americans for many years to come, in our view, that's an investment worth making. But again, some folks have done that. And it's not just Republicans. Democrats some have been reluctant to adjust the fuel tax. There's a claim that it hurts lower income Americans. But our view is that doing nothing actually costs Americans more than doing something. TRIP, which is a transportation think tank, put out a report that said that the average American today loses $600 due to a blown tire or busted axle due to inadequate road conditions. We also lose up to $1,000 due to wasted fuel costs sitting in congestion. So that's a $1,600 cost to do nothing versus right now, our proposal to adjust the fuel tax 5 cents a year over 5 years would cost the average American $112 a year. That seems to be a pretty good cost benefit, and that's why we're supporting adjusting that fuel tax to build a 21st century infrastructure.
Yeah, it kind of underscores the urgency with which we need to pursue this. Yeah. I know ASC always comes out with their report card. I imagine it hasn't gotten any better.
Unfortunately, it has not. It ranked our infrastructure into the country at D+. And that's not a grade that any of us want our kids to come home with. We can do better. It comes down to the political will to make it happen. And again, it's a shared responsibility. And our view is that state and local governments have done a lot of work in this area over the last several years. It's the federal government that has to step up. And again, Ronald Reagan raised the gas tax, working with Tip O'Neill. Dwight Eisenhower is the one that had the fuel tax. So both Republicans and Democrats have done it. And the longer we wait, we're eventually going to get this done. And it's a question of how much pain do we have to suffer till we get it done, and how much is it going to cost? The longer we delay acting on this issue, the more it's going to cost all of us as Americans.
Right.
Hey, Mark, I wanted to jump in and ask Ed a question, a couple of questions if I could. Ed, Larry LeClaire here, and I appreciate everything the Chamber has done with the FAST Act and extending the FAST Act to 1 year beyond its expiration, which was slated to expire, September 30th of this year.
Correct.
Couple of questions that come to my mind. What do you foresee in 2021 as far as infrastructure? Could it be? Are you thinking about? I don't know. There's been a big conversation about the Green New Deal, and potentially some sort of elimination of the carbon or a carbon tax, which has been talked about and banted about for a number of years since I've been around in D.C. What's the Chamber thinking and hearing about as far as those two particular items?
Larry, great question. I think, look, as I've talked about this in the past, we've actually moved the infrastructure debate. It's a national issue. I'd like to use the football analogy that we're in the red zone. We're getting close to getting a touchdown here. So no matter the outcome of the election, I think as we're getting through this pandemic, we're looking at economic recovery. I think we have an opportunity to use infrastructure investment to bring a very contentious election cycle back together and bring folks back to doing the people's business. Look, we're aware that there is a new Green Deal out there. I think we at the Chamber recognize the fact that if you modernize our infrastructure, we're going to use innovation and technology to build infrastructure that, one, is much more environmentally sensitive. is resilient to handle different climate changes than what we had back when these systems were originally built 50 to 100 years ago. And so we welcome that conversation. Obviously, we would rather it be through the free market rather than government mandate. But the fact that any new investment in infrastructure is certainly going to be more environmentally friendly. You talked about a carbon tax. Last I checked, adjusting the fuel tax, one could argue that's a carbon tax.
Sure.
If you want to look at it that way, I always joke with my friends on the Democratic side, we love carbon taxes. Adjust the fuel tax. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Hey, let me ask you that. We're coming up here in a couple of weeks, the lame duck session. What reading the tea leaves? Is there going to be a COVID relief package? Yeah. You think it'll happen? Or I heard yesterday or this morning, speakers said, well, perhaps it won't. COVID relief won't come until after the new Congress convenes in January. What are you hearing? Just curious, your thoughts.
Sure. Well, Larry, you've been doing this in this town for a while, and there's an old saying in Washington: they don't call it a lame duck for nothing. Usually, everybody has all these hopes that you can get all these major things done in a lame duck session, and the reality is usually everyone goes home disappointed. Now, our country needs a COVID relief bill. Every day we don't do one, more businesses are going out of business. We see more layoffs in the aviation industry, many other industries. From a public policy perspective, it's a disgrace that the Congress hasn't acted. But I'm just being political reality here is depending on the outcome of the election, I think no matter what the outcome, it still may be very, very difficult to get anything done. Now, one thing they have to do is the federal appropriations expires on December 11th. And so they need to either extend that through the rest of the fiscal year or extend it into next year. That's about the one thing that you can guarantee something will happen on. Anything else, we're going to continue to advocate for a COVID relief bill. We're going to continue to advocate for tax extenders. We need to get money for state DOTs and transit agencies who've lost revenue due to the pandemic. But anyone who tells you that they know exactly what's going to happen, or I don't want folks to have a high expectation for what could happen in a lame duck session.
Right. And interestingly enough, I was speaking with a colleague of mine yesterday, and he's like, hell, we got to get our ass into Minority Leader Schumer's office, and we're working on a rural broadband issue. And I basically, went to your point is I just can't envision anything at this point, really outside of maybe an armed services bill or, an appropriations bill beyond December 11th, at this point actually happening.
It looks difficult, but I will say in Washington, anything can happen, and we're in the year of 2020. So I wouldn't discount anything possibly happening.
Anything can certainly happen in 2020.
And I wanted to circle back a little bit. You mentioned private investment, and I wanted to kind of get a sense of how the U.S. Chamber sees that as a component of any transportation infrastructure plan going forward. Is that in the nature of P3s or other vehicles? How do you see that playing out?
I think a couple of those are true. Like P3 is certainly something we've been advocating for many years. And most folks think of P3 as like a big project. But again, if you look at Pennsylvania a couple of years ago, they pulled together 300 rural bridges to get a program done. So we think P3s are an option for a variety of different project sets. And so we just want it as an option. For too many states right now, it's not even an option on the table. We'd like to see it an option for every state. And look, we're not saying that it's going to solve all of our nation's problems, but it's got to be a tool in the toolkit. And so P3s, and again, P3s are not just money. A lot of what makes a P3 successful is the project delivery model, things is using as design build. And you're basically, when you do a P3, you're transferring risk from a public project sponsor to a private entity. and the private entity is taking on the risk of the project. And so obviously there's a cost there. But again, in some projects, it makes a lot of sense. So ways that we can encourage that. I will also tell you over the last 4 years, we've talked to many countries around the world that have sovereign wealth funds that would love to invest in U.S. infrastructure. But they said right now it's not easy to do. There doesn't appear to be a large project list. And to be honest with you, a lot of our public project sponsors aren't educated enough to do P3s. You look at our colleagues up in the north in Canada, they have a whole national P3 office. They have regional P3 offices. Mexico is doing P3s. We are behind the curve in this area. And so educating our public sponsors and giving them the tools to make it an option, we think has got to be a critical component of any infrastructure legislation.
Is the Purple Line project in Maryland an example of, where we need to become more up to speed on how to do P3s in the right way?
I think, and I don't want to get into the details of that project, but sometimes P3s don't work, and that's the marketplace. I'll give you an example. The Indiana Toll Road, it started with P3. The original financer left the project. Another one came in. I'm pretty confident that the Purple Line is going to get completed. And again, I don't know the details of what happened on the Purple Line to make the floor team drop out of that. But my guess is there will be another private entity come in to finish the project. I know the state of Maryland is committed to get it done. And so sometimes that's part of the free market, that maybe the first group fails, but another group comes in to finish the job. So that is part of the system. And we have to accept that not all these projects work. Now, I will, again, without knowing the specifics on that project, both partners have to have eyes wide open what a P3 is and what it isn't. It's not free money, right? It's not free money. It is a mechanism that transfers risk and that incentivizes the private sector to do something maybe that a public entity wouldn't do. But it works. I live in Virginia. We have a lot of P3s. We have a lot of success in the state here. We got I-66 that is now working much more efficiently due to a P3. Now, it doesn't make sense in every part of this country, but where it does, let's use it to make it it frees up whatever dollars we do have for projects that a P3 doesn't make sense.
Right.
And Ed, our members, Ed, would argue that if you're doing P3s for construction, you want to make sure that surety is in place. And that was the I-69 is the poster child for a foreign concessionaire providing 5% letter of credit to the Indiana Finance Authority. And subcontractors were left unpaid for upwards of 6 months. And we've always said, well, if bonds were in place and payment bond protections were in place, then certainly, the subcontractors on the I-69 would have been made whole. So we've advocated that, and certainly in the Maryland Purple Line, and the statutes are in place to protect not only the owner, but the subcontractors as well. So,
and that's good. I think that's an important part in making sure your industry is part of that. That could be a way to get us to feel more secure about utilizing this mechanism more around the country.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's a tool to be used in the tool chest. Absolutely.
So, Ed, in terms of the next Congress, assuming we don't get our infrastructure package in this Congress, which is not likely to happen, what will be some of the first things that the U.S. Chamber does to kind of move its agenda?
Well, I can tell you that we're going to make this a top issue. We're getting ready to launch a campaign that we want this to be, we want to build by July 4th. Our membership has been calling for infrastructure for the last 4 years, but we haven't got it done. And so instead of having all these members talk about it and put press releases out, we got to get something to the president's desk that they can sign into law. And so we're going to make a big push that this is a top issue in the new Congress, and are going to work with both Republicans and Democrats to come up with bipartisan solutions. This has always been a bipartisan issue. It can bring our country together. in spite of the very challenging time we're dealing with right now. And again, with our economy, it's a much needed boost. These are good paying jobs that could help a lot of economic groups. And again, as we modernize our infrastructure, we're also looking at, a lot of the infrastructure that was built before disadvantaged certain groups. And we have a way now to make sure the infrastructure benefits every single American. And so part of the modernization can handle that concept. And so look, young people today are trying to they want to live in a place that has a variety of options, that makes it easy for them to move, and they're open to different ways to move. And so those communities have embraced it. I'm thinking like in Nashville, Tennessee, as Charlotte, North Carolina, they're going to be successful. Communities that stick with old infrastructure, they're not going to be able to attract businesses and jobs to their community. So there's an economic imperative. There's also a quality of life imperative. And so this is going to be a top issue for the Chamber going into 2021.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, Ed, where can people get more information about some of the resources that you have available to help educate their elected representatives?
Absolutely. We got a website with all that information, and it's our Let's Rebuild America coalition. And the website, it's just Let's Rebuild America, all one word.com. And all the information on these issues and how you can contact your members of Congress is on that site. And I believe my email is there as well. So if there are any particular questions, obviously your members can talk to you all, and I'm available as a resource to help. I want to thank you guys. Have been a great partner working with the U.S. Chamber, and we continue to value the relationship we have with you all in this important effort moving forward.
Thanks so much, Ed. And thanks, Larry, for joining us to talk about infrastructure today.
No, thank you, Kat. And Ed, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I haven't seen you since Marshall McCallum stopped his P3s and in-person meetings, but it's always great to catch up, and appreciate all your wisdom that you shared this morning, and you're a fantastic resource for the NASBP. So thanks for everything.
Great. Good to be with you all.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.